People always ask how I balance my family life with 400 shows a year. I'm just doing what I love with the people I love. It's my magic life.
I like Wes Iseli. I like everything about him.
All right, guys, we're back. And this week we have, I don't even know, I'm going to let him get into it because this guy does everything. He's an author. He's an award-winning musician. He's got all kinds of awards in television. He's a criminal psychologist. We've got Natalie all buzzing. Yeah, this guy is an onion of all kinds of different things. I don't know if I'm getting his credentials right, so I'm just going to let him introduce himself. Everybody, it's Peter Sacco. What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Consider we're getting dumped on again yet. Some more snow. Can never have enough of it here.
Oh, all right, gosh. So you are near Buffalo?
I'm in Niagara Falls, Niagara on the lake area. So on the other side of me, like literally 5 minutes, on the other side of the Niagara River is Lewiston, New York, which has Youngstown, which has one of your oldest forts in the United States and also North America, which actually has a Spanish castle in it, which is really cool because it's haunted.
Ooh. Wow. All right. We'll get into all that.
That's fun.
When I said you're an award-winning musician, I know you had awards. Tell everybody your awards that's on your website and that's on your bio.
Well, Wes, I've got, my side gig before I became a psychologist, before I went to university, even when I was in university, I always thought I was going to play pro baseball or pro hockey. Injuries caught up, lack of motivation. But at that time, I was in a band, lead vocalist, rhythm guitarist. But I went to school. We had a band. We never recorded. We kind of hacked. And I started writing screenplays and short stories. So eventually I became an author. And I also wrote screenplays, actually, on NDAs. So I was writing movies for other people, getting paid for it, but they get the credit. So maybe about 15 years ago, I decided, you know what, I really like the film aspect, even though I am in the field of psychology. I like the music part of it. So started to have put together a TV series. We had 3 successful ones right after another. And I may come back with it. I don't know. But at that time, it was also starting to go back into the music field. So guys I had grown up with. So if anybody's in my generation, an 80s music person, will know who the Spoons are. They're a Canadian band. I grew up with some of the guys in Honeymoon Suite, which was huge at the time. But the Spoons, Gord approached me. He's the lead vocalist of the Spoons. And he's also the rhythm guitar, the lead guitar player. Let me get it right, with a band called the Flock of Seagulls. They're out of the UK, and they're still huge. They're touring around still. So Gordy came to me and he says, you know what, Pete, can you do some cool music videos for us or whatever? And because I've seen what you've done with your TV show and short flicks and that. So in a roundabout way, I did, I think, 5 music videos for them, for Ray Lyle and the Storm. He was absolutely huge in the 80s and 90s. Dear friend of mine. And then the idea came, well, why don't you do your own stuff, dude? So I had songs sitting around recorded and that from the late 80s, 90s. So we just brought them back, and they're in film festivals around the world, as well as the documentaries that I do in the short films, which a lot of it people love for whatever reason, paranormal stuff. And then I had the series that just came to an end called Historical Niagara, where we shot on both sides of the border, U.S. and Canada, the historical places here, because they're so amazing. And in fact, I see you have all you're really into Houdini, Kreskin, all that kind of stuff. So one of the episodes, they actually had Harry Houdini's nephew on. He's out in Vegas, and he came on because we used to have a famous person, so to speak, or a celebrity come and do the quiz on each episode. And I think he came right after Jeff Mudgett. So Jeff's a friend of mine. He was on, he's on the History Channel. He had American Ripper. That was his series, where his great-great-great-grandfather was the serial killer H.H. Holmes, Chicago World Fair, that was putting, bodies were disappearing in the walls. And I think this TV series, Supernatural, they've had an episode, American Horror Story, But Jeff's did the series talking about his great-great-great-great-grandfather, H.H. Holmes, who we believe was Jack the Ripper. So when Jack finished his killings, 1888, fled to the United States, and he picked off in Chicago. And that's some of the folks I brought on, because what I was doing is blending kind of the history with criminal psychology, which I was trained in, and eventually was trained by some of your retired FBI agents, profilers. So I got to know John Douglas, Roy Hazelwood. So I was doing that out in the field, so to speak, training cops, teaching students that want to be cops, psychologists, counselors, and the whole 9 yards. So my career, you said it's like an onion, a very complex onion, because you don't know what you're doing that day. But I used to liken it as a friend once. He put it to me. He goes, your career is like a fruit salad, because every spoonful you take is a different mouthful of different fruits on it.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah. That's what I try to do. Every day's magic, but if I do the same thing, she said she wanted to get a theater somewhere. I'm like, I'm terrified of that, because then it's like a 9 to 5. You're going to the same place every single day. I'm kind of scared of that. I like the variety of different venues and different places and seeing the world. I love that. So it's hard. I am drawn for some reason to Sleepy Hollow, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and Jack the Ripper. I don't know why, but I'm like fascinated with those two stories. I cannot get enough. I love every iteration that came out. I thought Jack the Ripper was solved recently with DNA. What did you follow that? Do you know anything about that?
Oh, so supposedly what they did is with carbon dating and DNA samples. So supposedly they were able to secure a fiber off of, I don't want to say Mary Kelly, it was one of them. And they were able to trace it back, who once again, it's always been Aaron Kosminski, also known as Leather Apron. That was the one that they really went with. So back in the day, I want to say it was the late 80s, more early 90s. They did a show, kind of like the old Unexplained. And they had brought on John Douglas, the greatest FBI profiler in my humble opinion. And I love John. In fact, John was loosely based, his character played by Scott Klein in Silence of the Lamb is based on John. And then also a Mindhunter, because, and they had Roy Hazelwood, and then a member of Scotland Yard. So they came to the conclusion, I believe it was John and Roy, because Roy, FBI profiler, he did violent sexual serial killer. So he was your guy, John Wayne Gacy, Jeff Dahmer, Albert DeSalvo, that type. But, DeSalvo was way before him, but it would have been, Jeff Dahmer and all them. So they still, with that, when they looked at the DNA from it, they broke it down. And then even though it could have been a multitude or plethora of suspects, because it was a common one strand of DNA that they said it could have been linked to so many. It could have been because that blood sample, it was common. It didn't really narrow it down. So if it was really truly solved, which, okay, in my humble opinion, I believe they knew who it was all on. I believe, people will call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever. And yeah, I'll take that as an award, because I believe a conspiracy theorist will not just look at mainstream media, but rather want to go their own digging and go against the norm, because the norm is very easily influenced and they will buy whatever's put out there. It's really interesting that this thing went from a major Scotland Yard investigation after the fifth murder. They're looking. Why all of a sudden would you stop looking for the killer? Why does Scotland Yard stop? Just like we can fast forward into the 1990s. Why all of a sudden do they stop looking after O.J. Simpson? Gee, I wonder why that is. It's because they know who the culprit is, so to speak. So there's various theories of Jack the Ripper. In fact, I wrote a book on it called Jack or Jill. You can find it on my website. And I did a short story years before that I believed that, and this is just in a fun way, Jack could have actually been Jill, and it could have been a midwife that was the killer. because it could have been possibly that, you know, STDs were so rampant, everything, it was like a buffet of STDs. And let's just say hypothetically, a woman of middle class, or at least that had a profession or even higher, wound up getting an STD which prevented her from getting pregnant. She became barren, she couldn't bear kids. But when you look at the modus operandi as well as the signature of what Jack was doing, he was totally disemboweling these women and ripping their reproductive organs out. So when you look at that, you know, as Roy Hazelwood from the FBI always used to say when he taught us, you can tell a lot about the artist by their work. So what's interesting is you look at what this person was doing or leaving, and it was up so close and personal that these were crimes of rage. So I just created a book on what if in Jack or Jill, where there's a modern version of Jack the Ripper doing killings in the late 1990s into the 2000s, and they have to solve the original Jack the Ripper murders to solve the modern day murders. And just what if it was a woman that found out her husband was fooling around with prostitutes and brought home an STD to her, and he or she was going to punish the women that she blamed for destroying her marriage, destroying her ability to procreate, which would have been huge. That was, that was the most important thing back in the day, especially for women, to prove their worth by giving their man, so to speak, a child, and keeping the name going. So I came up with that fun theory. But if you want to go to the more colossal one, it was a cover up with royalty, that basically somebody in royalty was doing something they shouldn't have done. And by impregnating somebody outside of the crown, guess what? That person could potentially be heir to the throne. Or the theory is that these women were rubbed out because they knew of the woman who had gotten pregnant, and royalty seized her, took her away, and that child nobody knows what that child was. Because if you looked at, I think it was the Duke at that time, if we looked at Eddie, he was out there a fair bit. And it's a perfect cover up if you look at why did Scotland Yard stop investigating? Because one minute they're coming in, why would they leave unless royalty says go away? And then there's the old hate crimes. When in doubt, start with racism and hate crimes, and that's a great way to distract people. So all of a sudden they're blaming it on the Jews. They're writing Jews in blood on this, and they're creating chaos. So usually when there's chaos that's created, it usually, I believe, it's almost the shortest distance between 2 points that tells you chaos actually is leading to something that is more pinpoint, that exists. So you have to amplify what exists, blow it up into a different bunch of areas, and then that way here you can put people off in 100 different directions, doing the royal goose chase, so to speak. And if you look at the suspects of Jack, oh my gosh, there's everybody on that list. And Francis Tombletti was a Canadian one from our neck of the woods. He eventually came to Canada. He was suspected of being Jack the Ripper because he was a doctor. You can just, you have Walter Sickett, you have all these different artists, authors, and then there's, once again, all of these wonderful clues that are supposedly left on gravestones, much like the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. If you look at that cover, supposedly Paul McCartney was killed in a car accident. They're singing about him dying in a day in life. And I Am the Walrus, John is, he's the walrus talking about it, which is a rebirth and all this sort of stuff. So it's these stories, I think, distract us. They really do so, Wes, where it's kind of interesting where we go down these rabbit holes. And I remember a friend of mine once saying it in film, where if you take the movies The Matrix with Keanu Reeves, who I absolutely love, and I saw a meme put out where it's Keanu holding a sign that somebody superimposed, where it said, The Matrix is actually a documentary. And I could say, yeah, I buy that because there's so much stuff out there. I think when people really open their eyes and they do a deep dive into stuff, they find out that it's not what it's worth, because oftentimes that the wizard behind the curtain, when you pull the curtain away, you find out that this person's on stilts and there's a whole other stuff going on.
Well, and this is fascinating. I'm loving this so much. I'm so into it. I could talk about criminal psychology all day long. I do magic for a living. I consider myself a 7-year-old kid at heart. I get to do magic for a living, right? So when I go and talk to a police officer, talk to somebody, you're supposed to be educated in that world, but they're just clocking in, doing their job, man. I have a personal story of a stabbing, and I asked the cop, can you investigate what angle that happened at? Could that person have stabbed himself, or could somebody else have done it? Because they wouldn't have stabbed themselves with their left hand. It had to be the other person. And the cops don't care. But CI, what is it called? CSI does it every week. But the local police officers are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm like, because I don't think that person stabbed himself, is what I'm trying to say. And they just didn't have time. They didn't care. So I can't imagine back in the 1800s, 1700s, when was the Jack the Ripper? I can't imagine them wanting to work on a case that long, especially after 50 years have gone by, 40 years have gone by. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many individuals that work cold cases. I was talking to one of the fellows from, I did a little film with him or something. I forget exactly what it was we did. He had a show on the History Channel, Zodiac or whatever, and he's one of these ones. His team, they're still doing cold cases, trying to figure out who Zodiac was or is. And it's the same with, there are some cases I believe that will never be solved because I think that they have already been solved. It's almost like a paradoxical thing that we'll never solve these, because the irony of it is that we've already solved it. But however, we can't really tell who it is, because if we tell who it is, it's going to have a profound effect and change the course of history. And I really do believe that is the case sometimes where there are cover-ups. I'm just thinking, what the heck's the D.B. Sweeney? That's a famous quote. The fellow that stole $100,000 it was, and then he jumped out of an airplane.
Yeah.
And
Super.
Yeah. And there are so many cool theories with that. And here's the funny thing. I was at my wife's best friend's wedding 2 summers ago. And I'm sitting at a table and there's a couple there, like people. I'm like the shiny toy or the freak at these things because everybody wants to talk about what I do because they find me amusing. Like, Joe Pesci in Goodfellas says, I amuse you like a clown. And that's kind of like how I feel at those. So they started going, well, I heard you really, you taught courses in criminal psychology, like psychopathic minds and criminal minds. I said, yep. You've written books on that stuff. Yep. And the fellow, Chris, goes, I got a really cool story to tell you. My wife sitting here, I believe her grandfather was D.B. Sweeney. And he goes, I'm thinking, really? And these people are out in the boondocks of Canada, literal hoedown town. You would think, okay, like this connection could never happen. But how he started to tell me is she was actually, adopted. And he was doing Ancestry.ca and some other thing, and he was putting it all together that basically her grandmother at some point was involved with that fellow that fit the profile of D.B. Sweeney that the FBI was looking for. And I just thought, you can't make this stuff up. This is actually quite amusing. So I was actually amused how much individuals, and I know this, students, much to my chagrin, I wasn't amused by it because I would get called to the dean's office. Even the vice president of the college, they call me because I'm up here in Canada, and they go, Pete, what the hell's going on in your course? And I go, what do you mean? And they go, well, we have one of the penitentiaries calling about one of your students is calling Charles Manson up. And I thought, are you kidding me? They're doing a project my students had to do oral presentations, and one's calling Charlie Manson up, another one's calling Charles Ng up. And it's like, are you kidding me? He was the one that was serial killing with Leonard Lake down in California, where they were killing people. And then he was putting them through the wood chipper. Hence, I think that's where you got the movie Fargo. That whole thing came. He was putting the bodies through a wood chipper, and they were also keeping sex slaves in a prison. And then they were doing with the dead people's possessions. They were going to their homes and having yard sales. That's how they were funding everything to build this massive bomb shelter, torture chamber. And I've got students calling them in prison. And I think the kicker was, and I almost lost it, where I think it was 92, 91, 92. And I said, okay, you guys, if you want to do cold cases that are still open, one was the Green River murders, which is probably the most notorious serial killers in American history. Gary Leon Ridgway was eventually arrested. And now he was the one abducting a lot of young women and killing them. In fact, he even had his daughter in the car, or this is his daughter or son, in the car, in the truck, the pickup truck, while he was abducting these women. And they had, at that point, over 1,000 suspects, and they were still looking and looking and looking. And one of my students calls, and they're calling and saying, I would like to get some information on this case. All of a sudden, I'm getting a call from the FBI asking, is this legitimate? Because anyone that's calling in, you're taught, we were always taught that you get a fellow like Wayne Williams, who was the Atlanta child killer, or at least the guy that was arrested. When they were looking to catch him, they put out a concert in order to raise money for the kid, or for the families of the children that were murdered. And part of it was set up that they believed that these people, a lot of serial killers, are narcissistic sociopaths or psychopaths, and they would inject themselves and show up because they want to be part of the investigation and feel like, oh boy, this is exciting. So it's without telling everybody how they did it, because eventually when they do get caught, they can't wait to tell everybody how they do it unless they cop the insanity plea like John Wayne Gacy was trying to, or some of these others.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
That's crazy.
There's so much here. All right, so I'm going to go back a little bit. You said that the Jack and Jill thing was you just made it up just to be fun. I love the idea, because they said that, who could it be? Because he just approached these people and got so close to them. A woman makes sense to me.
Okay, if you really wrap your mind around this, okay? If you're a midwife, you could go, or a doctor, nobody would question if you had blood on your clothes, correct?
Right.
You would be in and out. Also, if you go back to Whitechapel, that district, I've been to London once, and my sister was there. She did her she became a doctor in England and that. So she was down that area too. But if you go back, and they got some really cool tours there, as well as the Charles Dickens tour. The Brits do it really cool. So if you go back there in that time period, it would have, to some degree, we have a homeless crisis up here now in Canada. And honest to God, I was almost crying today when about 3 hours ago, when I saw a fellow, because it's basically, where in Celsius, it's about -12. It's about -10 Fahrenheit here with the wind chill. And there's a guy out on a corner in a pup tent in about 2.5 feet of snow, and there he is. And that absolutely breaks my heart. But we had homeless encampments around here because of due to a fentanyl crisis, a drug crisis, and other stuff. That would have been in the Whitechapel district on steroids. You would have had tons of homeless. You would have had a plethora of prostitutes that would have made the red light district look like, just a corner store. So you have all these walks of life there, which there would have been so much disease, pestilence, everything around there. So you would have seen blood. You would have seen sick people all the time. And you would have seen, prostitutes and other people looking for medical attention. So it would not have been out of the ordinary then to have a midwife or whatever it would have been then, a nurse or a nurse's aide going in there and, unfortunately, I hate to say it, performing abortions and doing this sort of stuff. So nobody would have questioned her, or a doctor. And that's why I came up with this. She could have got in and out of there easily. And on top of that, nobody would have ever thought a woman could have been a serial killer, especially when it was all women that were victims. So therefore, it had to have been a guy. It had to have been this. But if you bring a midwife in, she would have had at least some medical skills. She would have known how to use a scalpel. She could have carried one. Once again, nobody would have, questioned it. Because if I was to go with what John and Roy said back when they were on the show with the guy from the Scotland Yard, it would have been, well, if you had a butcher, once again, nobody would question blood on a leather apron or whatever. So that guy could just move in and out, in and out. And that's why Francis Tombletti, the Canadian doctor, was a suspect at one point. They released him, and they still believe to this day, a school of thought says that he is Jack the Ripper, because you wouldn't have questioned a doctor going in and out of those corridors because let's be realistic. You don't have 911 calls and paramedics running in there. What you actually had, and my wife and I watch it in reruns almost still. I never get tired of watching the TV series Doc Martin, which is awesome. And British show, and once again, it's a small village. You don't have paramedics going to these places. You have the doctor running to all these people in the small village in modern times, but this is what it would have looked like back in the 1800s.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. All right. Tinfoil hat or not, what is your thinking of O.J. Simpson? Because I have my feeling. She says he's guilty, done, electrocute him. I say, I don't know. And then I found out about the son, O.J. Simpson's son. And I have children. I have 3 kids. You would do anything you could to protect them. So they said that the son had weapons charges against him, like he threatened to stab his girlfriend and she had a restraining order against him, and that maybe he did it and OJ's covering for him. I totally buy that. That's what I believe. But what do you think?
My belief is he did it.
Okay.
I can buy what you're going there with, Wes, that he covered up for his kid because you don't want to see the kid go to jail. The only thing is, though, is you would have to ask, and I was speaking to a forensic psychiatrist at a talk in Toronto right when the Juice got arrested. And we were talking about it. I was a student at the time, just finishing up. I was starting my PhD, so I was talking to this fellow, and we talked about it. And once again, that was a crime of passion, because he literally almost, decapitated these people. So to get up that close and personal, and with that amount of rage, I could see it just with him. And then the whole question, which to this day was just a mind fogger, was the whole Bronco chase, where he's driving around in that Bronco or whatever. And fast forward 2 or 3 weeks, was it 3 weeks now? Basically, something similar happened with the whole Timothy Busfield case. I don't know if you've been following that, where Timothy Busfield, the actor, he's married to Melissa Sue Gilbert from Little on the Prairie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
And he's wanted for, something, wanted by the law. U.S. Marshals are looking for him, and it takes 4 days for him to turn himself in or whatever. And immediately when I'm reading that, watching some stuff on it, I watched it. It was really cool. I like watching some of the stuff Megyn Kelly puts out, because she dissected it, and she's got skin in the game, so to speak, with this. As a lawyer, her perspective on it. And I believe she has come, Melissa Sue Gilbert and her have exchanged stuff on X, so to speak, and not a good way with communication or whatever. And it always boils down to, if you're innocent, you would want to immediately go and prove your innocence, because you would basically have this alibi, but more importantly, this ultimate belief that you didn't do it, therefore you're going to prove that you didn't do it. But in both of these cases, what is with the stall tactic? And I would have bought into the whole son thing to a degree if he didn't take them on this wild goose chase, so to speak. And then there's, oh my gosh, he's going to kill himself. Who's with them? Al Collins is with them, trying to talk him off this ledge, so to speak. It made no sense other than it looked like a drama. And once again, I'll go back to chaos. While if you're creating chaos, it's to get people confused. And it really does work because people won't know where to look first. Or there's a seed of doubt where it'll be like, okay, he's driving away for his life because he believes he's going to be wrongfully charged for this, especially after the whole Rodney King thing. But the only thing is Rod King could not afford the dream team that OJ had signed up for. And, you look at who was there, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, these were big names, huge names that had been called in to look at this case, and Robert Shapiro. But it was just a bizarre case. The whole thing, the glove. Like this was something right out of a Michael Jackson video. The glove doesn't fit. Well, leather shrinks, but really, it really shrunk that much?
Right. Wow.
And you said earlier that they love to say how they did it once they get caught, but he got off. So then he wrote that book, right? How I would do it if I did it, but I didn't do it. So in that kind of him wanting to say how he did it, even though he didn't do it type thing. Does that make sense?
That's a good point. 100% good point. It could be. Or one of the great, in my humble opinion, the greatest police show ever is Columbo. Absolute. I've got the set. I watch it. It's on Thursday nights. They play it. Peter Falk is the ultimate Lieutenant Columbo detective. And he knows. It's the most amazing show because you know who the killer is within the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the show. They show it. And then it's Columbo's duty to go in there. And I believe he suspects the killer. He suspects people he talks to, the way it is within the first 10 minutes. He already knows who did it, even though he doesn't have a lot of information. But to go to your point about OJ writing the book, this is the whole Columbo thing. The more he's talking to these individuals that are the actual killers, but he doesn't know yet, they're actually volunteering information like, well, if I would have done it, this is how I would have done it, so to speak. And who talks like that? It's almost like you're volunteering that information because you believe that by putting that out there, you're becoming less of a suspect and more of a help. And so is that what OJ was doing, writing that book by basically saying, if I would have done it, I would have done it this way, which was different from the actual way. And does he believe that, okay, by me pretending to help and contributing to the investigation, which, he would think, or they would say, nobody was ever charged with that murder. So he's trying to help still, which basically, you're right. I think he puts a bigger target on himself.
Yeah.
So, criminal psychologist, I got a question. I have a guilty conscience. What causes that, and how do I get over that? And I don't think if I had like murder charges against me, I would turn red. But if we're in a room together and something comes up missing, my wallet's gone. Who took my wallet? I turn red, and I will help that dude do anything I can to find it to prove my innocence. But I feel guilty immediately. I didn't do it. What is that? What the heck is that?
We could go so many different ways with that. And a lot of it, my first question would be is, did you come from a background where your parents were strongly punitive, disciplinarian, or you got accused of stuff back in the day, wrongfully accused sometimes?
That might be what it is, wrongfully accused. I lived with my nephew. My nephew is a couple years younger than me, and we were always rough on each other. So I would get wrongly accused, and he would do stuff, and yeah, that might be what it is.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. We carry it forward. And it's interesting because if you look at the individuals, and I once did this as a demonstration in a lecture hall, much to the chagrin of a fellow I brought in. He was one of the leading polygraphers around there, which he does polygraph testing, lie detectors. And a really good lie detector will take 2.5 to 3.5 hours to conduct, because you want to set the person up. And as like what you're saying, you want to eliminate the nervousness. You want to show them that they can be calm. Because in a lot of cases, people that do take the polygraph tests are innocent, because that's why they're taking it. Because if you're guilty, why in the world the heck would you sign up for this thing? Like, for police doing it, okay? So the interesting thing, I brought this polygrapher, and he was one of Canada's best. So I brought him into my lecture hall, and for a better way, I didn't mean to do it, but I embarrassed him, because before he did testing with some of my students, who he would ask, so he'd ask for volunteers to come and take the test. So there was 5, was it 2, 2, 2, 6 students. And I remember telling Scotty, he's the polygrapher, that I can hypnotize individuals and they will beat that test. And he goes, no way, impossible. No, you can't. And so what we did is I put the movie on, Sudden Impact, one of my favorite, by Clint Eastwood. Love Clint Eastwood to death. And it's the scene where he's in the diner, you know, the famous "Go ahead, make my day." And I hypnotized 4 of the students, and 2 students would have photographic memory where they would be able to recall every single detail of the perpetrators going into the diner and holding it up, everything going on. 2 students would get no hypnosis whatsoever. And 2 students, I had hypnotized that as they're watching Sudden Impact, they're seeing Curly, Larry, Moe, and Shemp. That's all they're seeing. Okay? So I hypnotized them before the event, before I put it on. So let's just say, I think it ran 7 to 10 minutes. And then right after that came the polygraph test. And I just said, okay. And he was hell-bent that this wasn't going to work or whatever. And I just said, no, no hard feelings. I don't want to show you up in front of a lecture hall of you, I told him this doesn't make you incompetent if it gets beaten, so to speak, because he already knows that polygraph tests are basically 92 to 99% accurate. That's how accurate they are when they're done right. And that 1% that can beat them usually are psychopaths and sociopaths, because they can shut down. They operate at the primary brain level, which is that of a reptilian brain state where there's calmness, like there's nothing. So this is basically what I did in this situation. So he hooks them up to the polygraph test. The ones I didn't hypnotize, he's asking them about what they saw. And you would have got what any of us 3 watching, depending on our memory at that time and the amount of coffee we had drank prior, because caffeine does enhance your skills to process stuff a lot faster. They gave the report to him. And this was being done in front of the entire lecture hall. Second, 2, they come up and Scotty asked them, what happened and what did you see? And they said, this is what the perpetrators look like, blah, 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 blah. And they were even nailing how many buttons were, how far the zipper was done on people. And Scott was actually impressed. He goes, holy cow, I can't even believe what I'm watching this. He goes, this is kind of cool. Last 2, Curly, Larry, Moe, Shemp. I didn't use Curly Joe or Joe, the other stooges. There's actually 6 stooges in total. And Scotty asked them, and they're on the polygraph, what did you see? Who are the perpetrators? And what were they saying? And I made this even better. I made the 2 women, because prior to that, I asked, I knew they hated the Stooges. And here's the funny part. Oh, I've never watched the Stooges. But funny, when he was interviewing them, they were actually doing the voices and going, and doing all the, hey, Mo. So it's like, really? You guys just gave yourself up on polygraph tests because you guys lied. You said you don't watch them, so how the heck do you know what they sound like? So you actually have seen them, so to speak. But they're giving the description of the Stooges. And Scott goes, well, this can't be real. So he's looking at, you know, the galvanic skin response, and the brain waves and everything, looking at it going, wow, this is amazing. They actually believed, they were truthful that they believed they saw Curly, Larry, Moe, and Shem carrying that out in the diner. So a lot of what we can hold on to is self-hypnosis. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And this is the key. We can literally believe and make something that is so not true our truth. If we believe it or not, that becomes our reality. Because there's a huge differentiation between facts and truths. Facts are actual, and they are actual truths. Truths, on the other hand, are not facts necessarily, but rather my perception of an event and what I believe to be the truth. And when we look at cases, there was a famous case here. We had a serial killer literally 25 minutes from my house in the 90s that was abducting girls and killing them. And at that time, they had eyewitness reports of he was driving what looked like a champagne-colored, a cream-colored Camaro or Firebird from the late 80s model, or maybe early 90s model. So all of a sudden, anybody driving that, and here's the funny part, you're talking about guilt, people were like flipping out, going, oh my God, I'm going to be a suspect. So they were asking for people, if you're driving that Firebird or Camaro in that color, please come to the police station. Let us just check it. And then you got a sticker that was put on your windshield. They would, you were cleared. The funny part is this was on eyewitness accounts of what they saw when the one girl got abducted. Now, here was the problem with the situation. The person that eyewitnessed it did not know cars, one or both of them. If you're not a car person, you could confuse a Camaro and a Firebird easily. They look alike, but I'm a car nut. I could tell the difference from them within a second, by the nose or the taillights easily, and then even also the rims. So you can immediately. Also, if that person doesn't know cars, they can be kind of led. What did it look like? Did it kind of look like this car? So if you start showing people, oh yeah, it's got to be that one. At the end of the day, I believe it was a Datsun, a champagne-colored Datsun. So we're looking at domestic vehicles being looked at, whereas this was a foreign make, and they weren't even in the same ballpark. And so talk about wasted time on an investigation. The profile was even wrong because they believed that it was an individual that was probably blue-collar killer or whatever, and the guy wasn't. The guy was actually a graduate in accounting, but he was making his money running across the border to the United States, going to the reservation, buying cigarettes really cheap, booze really cheap, coming back, putting them in his quarter panels of his car, and then selling them at bars and whatever, and making a ton. He was making about $90,000 a year selling cigarettes and that stuff. So they were way off base with it. But here was the interesting part. We had a whole community terrified of Firebirds and Camaros that were off-white or cream-colored. And that became the boogeyman, or the boogie monster, so to speak. How often do we do this in our own lives, where we literally scare ourselves to death because of something we see on the news or what the media puts out, only to find out that, I saw what happened. People were preparing for Snowmageddon the past weekend. They were rushing to stores like, oh my God, we're going to do the toilet paper thing again and all. Like, if you really think about the toilet paper thing, that was the stupidest, dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life, where people were toilet paper. Really? Why, and it just goes to, I don't want to say what some people, some colleagues of mine that were psychiatrists that were insinuating what people have for brains. That's why they were going, loading up on all that stuff. But really, if you think about it, toilet paper, folks, if you're going to go and, and it was funny because I actually looked at it when I was in there. toilet paper and hand sanitizer. That was like the biggest thing since the Tickle Me Elmo doll back in the 90s where you couldn't get one. So it was almost like you could find people on the street corners, hey, come on over here, opening up their coat. Want to get some hand sanitizer? And I go into a flea market, for gosh sakes, hand sanitizers at that point. I was always ones that used hand sanitizer because to some degree, I think I do have a bit of OCD. So I was a germaphobe because of as a kid, the way I was brought up, so to speak, but not that bad. But I was buying it for $2 a bottle. We go into the same flea market, my wife and I. That same bottle is now $20. It's like, are you kidding me? And then yet the people are buying it. It's like, really? But that's the whole point. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis, and we can literally hypnotize ourselves and scare ourselves to death by buying into stuff that is actually not real, but we believe it. And if you look at fairy tales, I think fairy tales are excellent. We are all brought up on the notion that there always has to be a villain or a monster or something bad. And I think Stephen King did this really well. I admired his work. He was one of the reasons I wanted to write. Eventually I wrote. But it was mostly Hitchcock. I grew up loving Hitchcock. I grew up loving watching Kolchak, the Night Stalker, and then eventually Chris Carter's X-Files. With that, if you look at it, it's almost like we need something always in our lives to worry about, stress about, or be afraid of, because that is what we are brought up as kids. And it was always interesting where when I was a volunteer for Child Find, which is a huge organization in Canada, where we go educate kids, talk to groups about how to, there's the old stranger danger. And I would ask people, if your kid is lost in a giant mall, like we have the Eaton Center here, or if you go to the Galleria Mall in Buffalo, New York, it's massive. Imagine at Christmas time, your kid gets lost. And I would ask people, would you want your kid to wander around and possibly wander outside of the mall and get lost because you said never talk to strangers? Or would you want your kid to go and seek out somebody that looks like grandma or somebody that is dressed like a police officer? And that's what we used to teach, because the whole stranger danger where you're looking for the guy that looks like Charlie Manson, the long disheveled beard and all that stuff, that's not what they look like. If you look at Ted Bundy, he was a very good looking guy. You look at, what's his name there? Jeffrey Dahmer. He was a good looking guy. In fact, very wise that when he was on a field trip, I think it was it was high school. He went to a phone booth and he called the White House, and he was actually speaking to Walter Mondale's assistant that, he was the VP of the United States at the time under Jimmy Carter. And within a couple hours, they had a private tour of the White House.
Wow.
So they're charming.
That's crazy. Dude, the whole thing about the cars that you said, we had a similar thing here in Virginia with the DC Sniper 15 years ago. They were looking for a white van. I drive a white van. It's got my name all over it. So I was out because they were just looking for a plain white van. But come to find out, white vans were, at the time, just the most popular thing. Every time there was a shooting, there was a white van in the parking lot. And they were shooting out the back of a Cadillac. They had just...
regular.
Yeah, they had just... Yeah. It was like a boat car, though. So I said Cadillac, yeah.
Well, it's funny because when they were looking for the cream-colored Camaro and Firebird, a colleague of mine, Murray, he was out shooting that day, ironically, with the chief of police. They were at the shooting range. So Murray's got a couple high-powered rifles in the trunk and maybe a pistol. And he comes home from the shooting range, and he had never got his car checked. Pulls in the driveway. I think he went to open the door first. As he looks behind him, two cruisers pull up behind him. And the first thing is, are you kidding me? Like, he's terrified, thinking, oh my God, they're going to cause me a lot of trouble. They're going to think I'm him, especially since they find these rifles in the car. So he went into the house, called the chief immediately, and said, please call your guys and let them know we just finished shooting. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Wow. Wow. Dude, this is so fascinating. I could do 6 podcasts with you. I feel like we just got started.
I know, right?
Golly. So talk about. I'm gonna go backtrack. All right, the criminal psychologist stuff is amazing. We could do just a whole episode on that. But living there in Niagara Falls, you said you worked with Greg Fruin. You know Greg Fruin. I have magicians and non-magician listeners all over the world, 63 different countries watch our podcast. So what Greg Fruin connection do you have?
My Greg Fruin connection is he hosts the Niagara International Film Festival at the Greg Fruin Theater.
Okay.
And Greg is an awesome guy. Greg has his tigers. So I've had the great fortunes of going there, eating at his establishment. Meeting him and his wife are absolutely wonderful people. And actually having two of my, one of my music videos and my documentary, Niagara's Most Haunted Legends and Myths, screen on his giant screen in there.
That is awesome.
Oh.
That was actually really, really cool. Because the other guy that I had the chance I worked with was Nick Walenda. Nick Walenda was the fellow that walked across Niagara Falls. I don't know if you saw it on the tightrope. Nick's walked over a lot of cool things. And Nick is a lot like Greg. They have a lot of strong faith in themselves. They love what they do. They have a passion for what they do. And you could sit and talk to folks like that for hours. I know this, I'll be at Greg Fruin's theater in June, God willing. I get selected again because we've got stuff back in the film festival this year, which ironically, I believe in my video, I actually have Nick Walenda in the thing that I'm going to be showing there. But it's really interesting to see the roots of how Greg has developed that theater, because where it is, it started out rather small. Niagara is an interesting town. I grew up here, and it's I want to be Las Vegas, so to speak, where we've kind of gotten away from our roots, from what we really are in our history here, and we're going more and more towards that Vegas. I don't know. I think the Greg Fruin Theater will stay true to its form. It won't be, it's like Siegfried and Roy, that, those types of shows that are fun, that are entertaining. You have the interest, the awesome dinner theater there, like you can eat and everything. Like I thought, this is really cool. You watch a show and you can eat and have drinks. And I've seen other magicians, and I don't know what you're more into. Do you illusionist like David Copperfield or magician?
We do both. I mean, we get hired for shows just to do a family living room, or we do theater shows. We do a little bit of everything. Close-up magic. I mean, I'm in rural Virginia, so you pay me, I'm there. I don't have the luxury of saying, I have a $20,000 show, hire me. Big team. It's me, my wife, identical 5-year-old twins, 14-year-old daughter, driving around the country in an RV pulling a trailer. So we set up and go wherever you hire me.
So here's an interesting question for you. Are there, like insight in hypnosis, there are certain individuals, like myself, that are very difficult to hypnotize or can't be hypnotized? And a lot of that has to do with the strong will and the strong mind and not giving it up, or lack of creativity. Are there individuals that, for a better way of putting it, can always see through the illusion or the magic act and know exactly how it's done?
I don't know. I would have to know what other people are thinking. I was on the television show Fool Us, where I fooled Penn and Teller with the magic trick I created. To tell other people, I'm going to go fool Penn and Teller. I don't know what you know. How am I going to fool you with? I don't know. There are a lot of people that said they've never been fooled, and a lot of the BS. Right. They just don't want to admit it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I've watched magic acts, and I'm like, the very first true one that totally blew the doors off me is David Copperfield. Like, that was just beyond anything. Like, he was way ahead of his time when he had come out and did his acts and that. And here is the kicker, though. Now, this is where I think games are going to change with AI. Because now what you have, I see it in film even, where individuals, and it's really funny because this is I'm a very strong Christian. I did my second master's degree in theology because I was always interested in miracles and prophecies. And interestingly, I did my thesis on demonic possession versus mental health illness because I was always interested. But I remember a friend of mine, he was a priest from Ireland who
We
grew
could do
up.
a whole podcast on that. Demonic possession. We could do a whole podcast on that. How
Oh, I'm sure we could.
wow.
So this friend of mine, he grew up with Gabriel Byrne, the actor, the Irish actor. He was in Usual Suspects and a ton of different movies. Gabe originally was going to be the priest, and David was going to be the actor, and they want to flip-flop it, becoming the opposite. So I became really good with close friends with Dave, like a brother, when he moved here from Ireland, and he was, the pastor, the priest in our church. And I remember him putting it out once by basically saying, he goes, Pete, one day technology is going to advance so far that if Jesus came right out of the clouds, like is foretold in Revelation, people will say that's not true. I don't believe it. That's got to be AI. And that's where we're at right now. Like and that's the funny part of, if you were to put out a video right now on X, TikTok or whatever, and you're doing a real magic act, like really performing this in real time with real props, you're going to have a lot of people now that go, oh, that's just AI. And that's unfortunately what it has done. I think in some ways, like, technology is great, but I think we have kind of gone a little too far where it's now going to undermine trust on what we can believe as being accurate and true. And it really does spoil, quote unquote, the illusion and the creativity and the imagination of people, because this unfortunately has taken it and sucked the life out of a lot. I'm hearing that more and more, where people are going, oh, it's the CGI, that's AI, and what can I really look at or believe in anymore?
Okay, so as far as magic goes, there is a entertainment aspect from it, right? I can have David Copperfield's props, but I cannot do David Copperfield's show. His storytelling, his choreography, his light cues, all that stuff. I don't know that stuff. I could push a button and make my wife disappear in that box, yes. But I can't put on David Copperfield's show. Nowadays, if you're on AGT owns the rights to your clip that you were on. You can't even put it on your own YouTube because they own the rights to your and that clip. So you want to share that clip, they get the views on YouTube. You don't own that, right? That sucks. But also, all the comments underneath are all these 13-year-old little kids saying, I know how it's done. He did this, he did this, he did this. Now, on top of that is the whole AI thing. How do you make a card vanish from the deck and reappear somewhere else? And AI will take 10 guesses.
Yeah.
Does that take away from the trick? Or is that just the people that want to dig deeper? We've always had magic books. I have a library over here I'm pointing to. You can't see it. It's off camera. But there's always been magic books that have been written to tell you how to levitate somebody, or Greg Fruin turn his wife into a tiger. But does that take away from that magical experience you had that night?
No, because I do film, and I've actually used AI to recreate old photos from 100 years ago of tightrope walkers walking across the fall, people going over the falls in barrels, and they're in my latest music video that, God willing, is going to be at the Greg Fruin Theater this summer playing. But people will look at that and they go, that's really, really cool. And I think if we keep it within the boundaries. So one of the films I have screening, which is interesting, is called A Canadian Horror Story. Quickly, it's based on the most famous poltergeist case from 1970 that made headlines around the world. That even Johnny Carson talked about it on The Tonight Show. And you had reporters from all around the world, many from California, showing up pretending to be priests or nuns just to get in on this. So for 28 days, and I've got the 7 actual police reports, because I spoke to the 2 cops that were the original cops there, and the 1 cop, Scotty Crawford, God rest his soul, he's now passed, that was there for the entire 28 days. And in these 28 days, a kid got pinned on the ground by a chair that literally was holding him down, and it took 3 cops to try to lift the chair off him. While they're filling out a police report, cop looks up, off of the wall comes flying a plate at his head, misses his nose, stops about 3 inches short, and drops at his feet. equivalent to a district attorney comes and interviews the neighbors from all the noise that's going on in the apartment building. While they're sitting on the couch, it starts levitating 2 feet off the ground, and one of them jumps off the couch. The DA, which is our crown attorney, runs out of there, leaves his brand new coat there, and says, "I'm the hell out of here." Cops are there watching a kid sit on a chair that's floating 1.5 feet off the ground in the kitchen, moving around like it's flying around. And then the 28th day, the kid is on a bed where everything in the room is flying off the walls, drawers are opening. The only thing that doesn't move is a crucifix on the wall. And the kid starts levitating on the bed almost 2 feet off the ground. And Scotty pulls him off the bed. And then a priest goes in there not long after, and it ends at 28 days. Now, the funny part is when we did the reenactments, we never had AI. And I'm sitting there thinking, my God, this would look so cool with AI, what we could have done. But even with the reenactments, and it's on my YouTube channel, Historical Niagara TV show, a Canadian horror story, people were still going, is that real footage of the kid floating on the bed? And it's like, no. And it's just interesting that if you tell a story, a good enough story, or one that gets people's attention, you will literally, it's like hypnosis, illusionists, or magicians, you literally distract them so much that you have them eating out of the palm of your hands. And this is the reality, which is basically what you're doing with hypnosis and illusions is tunnel vision. That's all they can see. And they're blocking off their critical receptor cells, their way of analyzing things, because they're so caught up and wrapped up in it that you have their attention to the fullest. And that's what I noticed with the haunted TV show, and that where people they would question it, they would be skeptics. But if I was to present some information by cops, and this is what I believe why that case was so true, is for as long as I've been doing this, there was no cops that are going to sign a police report that says a bed was floating off the ground, a fridge was moving around the kitchen, a kid was floating on a chair. Cops were running out of there terrified to the fact that the chief of police put a ban that they were no longer allowed to go into that building. That's how you know that is real, beyond a doubt, because I don't know a cop worth their weight of gold that's going to say, yeah, I saw all that. They would be laughed off this earth. And this is one of the cases, you bring it up to this day, they're almost all retired now, but the older ones that are still hanging on would say, yeah, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. And a lot of it is they didn't know what to make of it. And to this day, nobody knew what to make of it.
See, me trying to solve that mystery. All right, there's no ghosts. It must have been a gas leak. They all saw it, and they all believed it. But it was a gas leak. I don't know. Yeah, it was hallucination. Yeah, that's crazy. And that was in Niagara?
Yeah, it was in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is about 15-minute drive from where we live in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was an 8-year-old boy that this was occurring to. They moved him out. He eventually moved away, and it stopped. But it was, like, as I said, I've talked about this on countless shows. George Nuri and I have talked about it on 2 different segments on Coast to Coast, because they all know it. It's one of the most, I would say, after the William Peter Blatty case of The Exorcist, which is based on a boy, not a girl. They used Linda Blair. I met her a few years back. They used her, but it was a boy that was actually playing with the Ouija board and doing all this stuff. And that case was as real as they come. Some of the folks I worked on with my series knew the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Conjuring cases, and they've been to, one of my folks that was on there, quote unquote, the psychic medium, so to speak, she had been to the museum down there, saw Annabelle and all that stuff. And, she used to say, oh yeah, what they saw was real. Of course, West Point, they get invited to West Point in the United States to go and investigate something. Why? You don't get military calling people in like that. And, military would be like, hush, hush, lip, lip. We don't want to talk about this stuff. But yet they're showing up to stuff like that. That tells you how real this stuff really is. But a lot of people don't want to admit it's real, or they go the other way. And interestingly, we were talking, I think it was on with George. I was talking about this because he had brought it up. And I said, what's interesting, I think with the advent of technology, with cameras that we can set up, you're catching these things off guard, because they used to know what a camera looked like. The lens was in front. But now if you're doing selfies, a lot of people are catching these things behind them. And I've seen stuff that made my skin crawl. It absolutely is disturbing. That's why I got out of the show. I wanted no part of it because something did follow me home after one, because these people were playing with the spirit box. I saw something run up the wall, disappeared through the ceiling. I heard an audio voice fill a room that 12 of us heard. And it was like, all bets are off. This is not fun anymore. It's fun to tell the legends, that stuff. But when people go poking and prodding, it's like, well, it's like Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters. Like, well, who brought the dog? It's under the coats. It's not a dog. This is something that we don't know what it is, and and I think that's just where we come to a way of looking at life where what is reality nowadays, and what is illusion, and what is this the gray area of what we should be believing versus what we should be challenging within our beliefs.
So what do you think about the guy that had the heart attack that had the Annabelle doll? Did Annabelle kill him? Coincidence? Was there something to that?
I don't know how much of that was sensationalized, because there's always three sides to every story. The two people that are telling each side, and then the truth that's somewhere in the middle. And I don't know how much stuff has been sensationalized, because I do believe a lot in what Ed and Lorraine were writing about. I did read one of his books, and it was really, really fascinating. And to be called into cases, there's got to be some substance to it. However, how much is sensationalized? They put a lot of credence and believed in the Amityville case. However, people that were growing up in that house, they put out documentaries. They talked about it, and they said, no, it really wasn't what you thought it was, and that stuff. So it's a matter of how much can we really believe, and are we willing to believe? And how much really is it to sell books, sell movies, and that kind of stuff. And, and I think that's with it, even in criminal psychology, that at the end of the day, it lies with the individual to decide whether they want to believe it, not believe it, or what they choose to believe.
Dude, we have done an hour, but I'm not getting rid of you yet. If you have time, I have a couple questions for you. Promoting your books. You have over 30 books. I'm just going through your website. The ones that caught my interest was Anger Type. I don't know what anger types. I have a temper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to check that out. The Internet Apocalypse. I would be lost without Google. Without how do you scramble eggs? I know how to. How do you make an omelet? I know how to scramble eggs, but I don't know how to make an omelet. Just leave it alone, Wes. But I didn't know that till I Googled it 10 years ago. Your haunted books you touched on a little bit. But the one I want you just to wrap up this podcast with is Gummer, the World's Last Toothless Vampire.
I wrote a graphic novel, and it's basically looking at diversity and tolerance. And it's literally about a kid that gets bullied, gets passed around from foster home to foster home, where nobody understands him. And ironically, he literally runs into, no pun intended, a vampire. But unfortunately, when the fellow turns into a vampire, he's a homeless wino that's lost in society that nobody wants, and he's toothless. So he gets bit by a vampire, but the problem is he's a vampire now, but he doesn't have any teeth. So he basically gums. He tries to gum the kid, and the kid's like, what the hell are you doing, man? Trying to give me a hickey? And what it is, it's about a kid and a homeless person, so to speak. Foster home kid being tossed around, homeless person being tossed out of society. And they're metaphors for each other, that they find each other, and that no matter what we are, we can relate at some level because we are humans. And also, if you go onto the website, there are a lot of free downloads. One of the book people might want to check out is Why in the Hell Serial Killers? Because I got asked this. I was at a Comic-Con, and I wound up having lunch with David Morrissey. He played the governor on The Walking Dead. So we were talking because David was really into what I was doing at the time, hosting the paranormal show. And he was telling me how much his wife really loves that stuff. And here I am going, dude, like, what the hell is it with people being obsessed with and even glamorizing zombies? And then at that same Comic-Con the next day, I was getting coffee, And I wound up talking with Ian Somerhalder. He was on the Vampire Diaries. So we started talking, and we're talking about, it's like, dude, if you really think about this, people right now, especially women, love zombie stuff and vampire stuff. And what are both of them? Serial killers. So why in the hell serial killers are people so obsessed with and even glamorizing? Because, Twilight, if you look at other than and I'll admit this, I actually read the books and I like the series for what it is, because I like the whole mythology and the interaction in it. But if you look at it, once again, these are cold-hearted killers. And I remember before we end, driving to lecture at university one night, and I've got Toronto radio station on, and at that time, Sopranos was at its peak, and women had voted the sexiest man alive is Tony Soprano, not Darvello, but rather him, wow. Tony Soprano. So the sexiest man alive is a guy who cheats on his wife and kills people and does racketeering and all this bad stuff, and he's sexy. That's interesting. That's scary, but it's interesting.
It's very interesting. Very weird.
And it's the guy's role to protect and to look for danger. And women are just taking it all in all day. What the heck is that psychology-wise? Why would you want to take all that in all the time? I mean, they watch those murder mysteries all day long.
It's interesting. But I got to say, I wouldn't be attracted to a guy that was cheating on me. And yeah, that wouldn't be my thing to go after. But the murder mysteries are interesting. I don't know why. It's just, it is. I like the murder mystery books. I like the whodunit things. I like it.
I only like them when they put a bow on the end. That's what I didn't like about CSI. She loved it. She wanted to be a...
They wrapped it up quite a bit, but not always. But X-Files you probably wouldn't like, because it's always wishy-washy. Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. So
that's my favorite show of all time.
Yeah, it was good. I like it too. But he wouldn't like the endings of them because they don't have a solid, definite answer.
You see, I always like the monster versions of the X-Files. The whole conspiracy thing, the alien stuff, that's kind of okay. But it was the one-offs, the monster stuff, that I really, really, really liked. And, there's banter of it possibly coming back in a reboot form, or there's, more and more of it. I still believe you're going to see it back again for another season. I don't know when it's going to happen. I met Gillian Anderson in Toronto just after right before the last season came out. And I never even knew she was going to walk away from it, or I would have actually asked her. But no, I could see a show like that coming back. People really like that kind of stuff. And I know my nieces, they're young, they love Wednesday. So this whole, I grew up, but it was way before my time, but it was still out on TV, The Munsters, Addams Family, and all that kind of stuff. That was cool stuff.
That's what I was into. Yeah. Dude, you were awesome. Thank you so much. Time just flew by. I didn't get through half your stuff. Tell everybody your website so they can check out your books and check out all your stuff.
Yep, you can go to Peter Andrew Sacco, SACCO.com. You can download books there, or you can watch films that we have up on Historical Niagara TV show. It's on YouTube.
Nice.
Dude, you were awesome. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Fun.
I can't wait to go back and listen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Only thing we have left to say is see you next week.
Check us out online at wesiseli.com and patreon.com/Wes_Iseli for behind-the-scenes videos, blooper videos, never-before-seen footage, discounts on merchandise, magic trick tutorials, and more. That's Wes Iseli, spelled WESISELI.